this is the last lecture of this summer school. Still see many of you still awake and alive. This is good. Actually, one time my friend was talking about like a very important character a professor have to be. So I know everybody, you have to be smart, you work hard, you're diligent. But one thing all professors have is persistence. So you folks here all have that trait, so you have a good start. So be persistent, basically never give up, and try as hard as you can. Okay, so this is an experimental talk, so I'll see if we can get theorists to tell us something about what kind of systems one can work on and what kind of properties we should be looking at. So today I'll talk about using single molecule manipulation in studying biological systems. So this is to basically finish up what we had last time, talking about what's the meaning of this manipulation. So experiment. So we can get data, we can interpret that. And then there was a question. Okay, so why do I care about polling, right? So most biological systems naturally may or may not have anything to do with polling. Of course, like muscles, muscle protein, sure, muscle contractions naturally will have these mechanical properties. But most other proteins, they may or may not have anything to do with that. And then also, so when you do these experiments, the information you get, how are you going to compare to all the information accumulated in the last 100 years, right? And are they meaningful? Are they better? Are they more accurate? Or they're just field experiments? So first we want to know exactly what this data means and how one can compare these to, say, the chemical reaction experiment. So we attempt to do this. We do the polling experiment, right? So we have a mechanical perturbation to the system. And on top of that, we add chemical. So we do the polling experiment under different chemical denaturing conditions. And we also did a polling experiment under different temperatures. So let's start with the temperature, because with the denaturing, it's a little bit complicated, because then we compare that to denaturing. But actually, we're using it a slightly different way. So we did the polling experiment. So these are force extension curves. We did that under different temperatures. So, and then we can get the force histogram. That's usually near Gaussian. So we did it. And then we can get basically the most probable force. And then we plot that as a function of the temperature. We can see the force basically goes, it decreases with the increasing temperature. Yes?
So how Gaussian are those distributions, and why would they be Gaussian? I would expect them to be non-Gaussian in a non-equilibrium system.
Well, I don't know why, but the force is somehow or reasonably Gaussian. The work is not. So they're not exactly Gaussian, but they're related, but somehow in reality, I don't know, have a full explanation. But I would not say they're really Gaussian. So this is just, so it's not, perhaps it's just more obvious in the work. Maybe it's non-Gaussian, it's just not obvious. I mean, you can't fit them completely. But this is a common method people use that to reduce information. And we can see the error bars, and we're not really using the exact position to a great extent. Right now, we just want to see a trend, so it doesn't really matter. So people use this just to get a number. It's basically phenomenological. It's not really exact. And if we're trying to fit with a different curve, that's possible, different distributions, but it's a little bit more dangerous when you try to fit it with different curves and you have a model, what happens if the model is wrong. So Gaussian is basically more generic, and people have been doing that, and we're just trying to see a trend. So there is a lot of debate when you the trend is a linear, is a curve. Who knows? Basically, you fit it, it fits. But in this experiment, we're just trying to see if there's a similar trend. So in this case, we can see with the temperature, it decreases somewhat linear. It doesn't really have to be linear because in the chemical denaturant experiment, they do decrease somewhat linear, but those are different parameters, so basic free energy, and those are converted with their kinetic studies anyway. So it's just a trend, like a decrease. It's not exponential, put it this way. If it's curved, it's slightly curved. So this trend, and then also, so we did different polling grades, also give us similar trend. So this is basically a qualitative description. Okay, so don't take the number too literally. Yes.
What forces are being plotted on the right plot?
Okay, so this is the peak force. So we look at all the peak force and put them in a histogram.
Is that for a single track, or is that for a single pole, or?
It's for many poles. So you get all the peaks from there. So we can see, I mean, there is a little bit of trend going up, so it must be some errors here. So it can't be, even the distribution is Gaussian, it can't be true Gaussian. There are a lot of systematic errors too.
So I'm still trying to understand this plot. And when I look at the left force extension curves, there's, at least in a couple of them, the last peak is dramatically different from the rest of them. Is that thrown out, or do you include that, or how does that? Okay, so this one is thrown out because this is the detachment peak, is where the bond between the molecule and the tip or the substrate are broken. So that has nothing to do with the molecule. Okay. And these are unfolding peaks. So basically, the peak height tells us basically indication how strong the bonds are. So in this case, it's mostly hydrogen bound. Like if you more unfolded protein, this one, if you break the hydrogen bond, they're unfolded. So basically, it tells us the strength, and it at different give us an indication the barrier high. So at different temperatures, they have different barrier high, and in this case, of course, so different polling, so we can see the absolute number does not necessarily mean much because these are non-equilibrium measurements. If you poll it slowly, the force will be lower. But the trend is consistent. That's all this is about. So basically, you get these force extension curve, and then we look at the peak position. So we record this. So this one's 200, this is 190. And then we'll put them in the histogram. So this 25 degrees is put them in histogram here. Okay? And then we get a histogram and we sort of fit it out. That's just a way to get a number, so approximately. So we can see the distribution is shifting. That's it. And the Gaussian does not really have like some fundamental theoretical basis. We don't have to deal with the Gaussian, but that's a convenient way. So we just want to see basically the distribution is shifting to this way, to a lower force when we increase the temperature.
Is that are you plotting the average forces on the right plot?
This one pretty much is like average, but basically use the Gaussian and look at the
so you use your fit parameters to make those.
Yes.
Even though you have all the data, you use the Gaussian mean.
Right. Well, the thing is sometimes we have outliers here. If we use the average, the mean from the experimental data, sometimes we have some errors from basically outliers that are basically have nothing to do with this process, but basically a huge noise that makes that introduces a magnetic error. We can do that in this particular case. We don't have. I mean, the data is relatively clean. We use that in the numbers, but it's very simple, right? You can see if the distribution is reasonably smooth, and you just take this data, you get pretty much a similar numbers as the average.
I guess when I look at your force distribution curves, I see this sort of systematic long tail that seems to be definitely non-trivial.
Then that may be it, but sometimes there are peaks coming from some different mechanisms are there. But I think that maybe there is something that's not trivial. But in our here, there are some basic phenomenological approaches trying to get basically the most probable force. So those tails are not necessarily going to make any difference. And in this case, that's what I say. The distribution I don't think is exactly Gaussian, but this is a way to get approximate value, which we can see a trend. Okay, so we're not really trying to say this the shape of that. So basically, this is more or less a qualitative description. So they decrease the same way as what people did in the chemical denaturant. So that's already a big step because they don't have to. If they're completely different mechanisms, right? Why should they respond to the temperature the same way? And it's somehow linear. I mean, sure, the force is not energy, but then so we would like to try to look at the free energy. However, free energy we need to use density equality, and the error bar is much larger. So, but then we can compare the parameters a little bit more directly. So we use the method I described in the last lecture. Then we get the free energy barrier to unfolding of the Titin I-27 as a function of the temperature. So it decreases somewhat linear. But sure, we can look at the error bar. We know so the absolute number is, we don't want to look at the absolute number and take that too seriously, but it's more of the general trend. So if one trend is not so certain, then we do different ways and they all have this trend, and so going down with the temperature linearly. In this case, it's a little bit difficult because the differentiation for the different free energy barrier as a function of temperature, it's not that big. The difference is small, then it's just the property of this molecule. So we're not seeing too much. It's just the way it is. And then from these, because we did temperature dependence, we can have an estimate of the entropy and the enthalpy, and then we get these numbers that are similar to what people did in the false measurements. So,
but I think what you're getting there is it's not an entropy but an energy, because that free energy is not the Gibbs free energy but the helpful free energy.
This one is Gibbs free energy, right?
Why?
That's what we did.
What you get out of the Berezovsky
Yes.
procedure is a helpful free energy.
That's Gibbs free energy.
Because you're fixing the end-to-end distance.
Okay.
And that will be the equivalent to the helpful free energy.
This you need to discuss with Christian. I talked with him. He has a lot of review. This is, I'll leave it to the theorists. It gives free energy. It's the potential mean force, which is Gibbs. It's Gibbs. Okay. Well, he probably have his lecture notes. He has that. He basically said it explicitly. I mean, I don't know if it's the original derivation. I think that one maybe Helmholtz. Original original derivation. But when he talked about single molecule, okay. So in single molecule, I have discussed with him about this. It's a little bit difficult to define the constant volume versus constant pressure. But basically, this is when you talk about potential mean force, right? So
the potential mean force is the helpful free energy profile.
Well, he has an intellectual note. So he says the Gibbs free energy. And basically, it's like a chemical potential. I believe in some of his review article he has that, and he will explain exactly what it is about. But it is Gibbs free energy, so he okay with it. Okay, so this is somehow complicated. I think his original derivation is it's imposed, I believe, but when you apply to a single molecule and then with all the and in Hummer and Double, I think there are people with that too. So it's I'm not a theorist. I don't want to argue about that, but there's descriptions there. Yes.
Just a quick question. Maybe you said this already, but are those trend lines theory curves or are they just experimental fits?
These are experimental fits.
The fits.
Right. So it's just a trend. So to say, okay, they decrease somehow. Yes. There's another question. Yes.
I have a question about since entropy is thermodynamically conjugated to temperature, so can we say that the slope of the curve in the first figure can be divided as entropy?
Well, okay, we do assume so they're not changing with temperature too much. I mean, so people have done that. Sometimes there like this entropy is a little bit function with temperature, but not so much. So within our accuracy, we assume it's consistent. It's a constant. It doesn't change too much with temperature, basically. So we just get an estimate of that.
So entropy is a constant in the process.
Well, I mean, it don't change too much. It's always constant. And if people did that, they're reasonably constant, basically. So we're just trying to see a trend. We're not trying to getting these numbers. We're not taking it too seriously. But we just want to say this is on the ballpark similar to what people get from the chemical denature. Right. I mean, these single molecule experiments, the measurements never that accurate, and then so these numbers are not going to be as accurate as what people get from the bulk measurements. But we just want to say at least we're orders of magnitude correct. So like from bulk, this is on the order of like 25, and this is similar. So we also did the polling experiment under different denaturant concentrations. So the difference is that when people do denaturant experiment, usually they put them. So there's a big debate, right? So how do they get information from denaturant experiments? So they put denaturant on different concentrations and they look at the kinetics, right? And then they extrapolate that to zero denaturant concentrations. And then we do that to some extent. We extrapolate our result to basically zero external force, right? Zero speed. So in principle, if we extrapolate it right and they extrapolate it right, the numbers came out from these experiments has nothing to do with how it was perturbed, right? So we use force, but eventually we extrapolate that to zero external force. And when they did use the different concentrations, and then they actually get the limit with the no zero m, right? So no denaturant. So the question is not so much which method is more correct, because if you do it correctly, you're getting the number, basically the equilibrium information. That means it has nothing to do with how you perturb the system, right? Of course, if the method, if you extrapolate with using a straight line, it's not a linear, it's not a straight line, then there is an error. But that it's not the problem with the method itself, it's how you interpret the data. So ideally, if you extrapolate correctly, and then you get zero, like a zero denaturant concentration limit, zero force limit, these two numbers should be similar, except there's still one parameter that's different, which is the end-to-end distance. So this is what happened. We think well, first, this is the right question to ask. It's not so much of these two methods people are debating. So when there's one extra parameter that's basically a constraint for the Poland experiment, which is the end-to-end distance. Okay? So for chemical denaturing, they don't have any of those. It's just folded versus unfolded state. But with the Poland experiment, we do have this curve going as a function of end-to-end distance. So we have to go from small end-to-end distance to long end-to-end distance. We pull it like the 1D, but it's not so important. The important thing is it's just going from small to large, right? Because the scale is not necessarily important. Perhaps the size of basically the free energy difference, that the magnitude is more important. So the question to ask is, if one has this extra constraint of the end-to-end distance, then we follow that. Is that still a good reaction formula, right? Because so in principle, the chemical denaturing. So say this is a cartoon, okay? It's not a simulation. So don't take that too literally. So basically, there's some values. So there's a folded state. This is an unfolded state, and then going through that there's a transition state. So usually when people do protein folding, there's an unfolded state. It does not mean it's totally stretched. Usually it's just, for example, this one has hydrogen bonds and the hydrogen bonds are broken. So instead of a compact state that has a well-defined structure, now it's a loose, relaxed state. That's all it is. So that's what they define unfolding. So this is the path they study. So in principle, they're going through the lowest free energy pathways and through some transition state. And of course, the transition state and free energy is slightly higher, they need to go over this barrier. And with the constraint of the end-to-end distance, so we have to follow the coordinate, the end-to-end distance, then the actual constraint can only make it the energy slightly higher, maybe. But from our experiment, okay, so this is just sort of a qualitative description. So the way we did it, so we did the force, okay, so they follow some kind of pathways. But then we tilt the free energy landscape with temperature or with denaturing concentrations. So we're trying to do the force and then guide the molecule through this pathway and under the conditions that this may be tilted, right? So when we tilt this, and it's the same thing as denaturing. When they do that, they tilted the free energy landscape. So when we tilt it, and these two methods will get similar results. Therefore, we say these two pathways are probably not too far away from each other. So if this one is going like all the way from there, if I tilt it this way, the value is probably going to be very different. It's not absolute proof, but it's an indication. Yes.
So when you're tilting the free energy landscape with your chemical denaturing, how do you know you're not introducing rotations in the multidimensional space as well?
Well,
you could be shifting the plane of your reaction coordinate into an entirely different set of values.
You could. So we're saying we didn't tilt it that much. Like when we changed the temperature, we didn't change it by that much. And so the idea is we sort of tilt it. So if we use the chemical denaturing, we tilt it sequentially, right? With more and more, and then for example temperature, and then this one. Basically, that was the idea. This one doesn't go berserk, so it has it pretty much follows the value of the chemical denaturing closely. So they're probably very close to each other. So that was basically the argument, right? If you tilt it and then one goes completely different, right? So they're probably very far away. Well, it could. It could be. These two pathways could be very different. But we told it different ways, and they all seem to be very close to each other. So they're probably close. Hey, it could be coincidence, but usually two wrongs don't make a right. So that's the argument. At least this will be the right questions to ask, the right way to think about the system, instead of arguing whose experiment is better, like doing polling or chemical denaturant. So it's not so much the results; these are similar. Maybe so some of the molecules may go very different. Then these two methods probably not comparable. And so we're saying, so in the case of I-27, they seem to be reasonable. So it's possible many of the molecules, these are the experiment, these two experiments, we can compare the results. So one can see that it's not too surprising. Basically, if you go think of a protein unfolding, usually the size go from smaller to larger size, right? So if you look at the end-to-end distance, usually it's going from small end-to-end distance to large end-to-end distance. So in that case, they're pretty much similar, right? So, and then maybe there are some molecules possible when they unfold, the so-called end-to-end distance or some size is actually smaller and then eventually become larger. Then that might be a problem. I don't know the example yet. I imagine out of the several 100,000 proteins, maybe some will do that. It's possible. But the idea is this is the right way to think about it, and then perhaps a lot of proteins, and the majority of proteins, this is okay. And the difference is when we do the polling experiment, we pull the molecule apart, guide them to the unfolded state, and we continue to pull it. So we stretch them all the way to this stretched state. So we're actually probing this part of the free energy landscape that's not probed by normal unfolding experiment. So this is just a way to say this is the kind of information the polling experiments are getting versus the chemical denaturant. So it's just a conceptual thing. So one thing is when people talk about, like people do simulations, I'm pretty sure most of you know this better. So for example, protein folding, this is funnel theory, right? It goes, this giant funnels from the top and then go down, and then the protein will go through some stages and then fold. So most of the protein folding experiments are actually only probing the very bottom part, a very small part of the landscape. It could be the most important part, but it certainly does not probe the rest, which like proteins, sometimes when they're just synthesized, they could be in this type of state, and then this part was never probed. In this case, of course, they sort of behave like one like chain. There's nothing too interesting there, but we do see that. And then if there's anything, and sometimes provides you so intermediate states, then that will be part of the results. Yes? Yeah. So I think this is basically saying this is the kind of information we're getting. And so, of course, by knowing that, then if you're interested in this part, then you can focus on that part of the flow. So, with this, so we know, now we know what the manipulation experiment will tell us. So now I have a question to you. What kind of systems and what kind of problems do you think one can probe in terms of biological? One can probe this technique. Can you give us some examples? Yes.
Well, so I guess I'm still a little confused. When you apply your chemical denaturant, it is going to distort the free energy landscape in some way. And your reaction coordinate is just your end-to-end distance. And when you apply temperature, it's going to distort your free energy landscape in what a priori should be a totally different way. And so, again, you're still probing it with the reaction coordinate being your end-to-end distance. So how do you know that that the way that you've filtered your landscape is the same? And are you getting some understanding of how your particular deformation of the free energy landscape is performed?
I don't think that's what we're getting, but that was the point. We don't really know how we perturb the free energy landscape, but that was the point. Doesn't matter how you perturb it, these two seem to be very close to each other. So that was the whole point. So they are probably very close to each other on the landscape, because we're tilting the landscape randomly, based almost, right? So because if they're very far away and then we systematically tilt it, well, maybe by chance they change in the same way. So that was the whole point. We change in all different ways. And they always seem to change the same way. So they're probably next to each other, the pathways. Right. And it's not a foolproof argument, but it's just an indication. And then if you think about the physical interpretation of these, that seem to make sense. And the important thing is, this is the question to ask, not about which one is better. It's basically the only difference is the end-to-end distance. It's not mechanical versus chemical. Okay. So, anybody has suggestions? So we can look at this kind of thing. Well, first, this is an example of protein folding, but you can think that that's what you can get from stretching molecule. It doesn't not even have to be molecule. It could be anything. So, anyone want to tell me some systems that you think is interesting? Maybe people have done it. Maybe people have not. Maybe people should be doing it.
Self-assembling viruses.
Assembly of viruses. Yes.
Can you probe the actual expansion of, for example, the tobacco mosaic virus as it grows?
As it grows.
Can you nucleate on the tip of your cantilever and then and probe as it grows?
Okay, so that's probing coupled with the chemical or biological reaction. That's going to be quite complicated, because when you, if one can, maybe, I think current state of the art is a little bit hard, but I think people have done some, I don't know about virus, but some kind of microtubule growth, and they follow fluorescence. Well, fluorescence is not, it's somewhere just sitting there and you can watch. The manipulation is a bit hard, because while you're doing it, you're pulling it, you're actually perturbing the system. So that may actually affect the results. So usually we like to study something that's stabilized, but sure, if the time scale allows us to do that, ideally, that would be very exciting. But speaking of that, so probing the virus assembly, people are doing that now, or virus like genome packaging. So for bacterial virus, usually it's a double-stranded DNA that packed into this phage, right? So it has a way the motor will stuff all the DNA into a very small volume, and then it will inject to the cells with ready to infect. So Busmante's group has studied that and on the force, how much force they actually generate through packing. So that's a good example. Anything else? Yes?
Is it possible to sort of attach things such that they're attached stronger than any of the covalent bonds that might be along the chain, so when they break in the middle as opposed to the edge?
Yeah, well, okay, so that's an interesting question, because I think AFM, in the case of AFM, it's possible. So when it breaks, we could possibly probe covalent bond breaking. I don't know if people are focusing on that yet. I think it first started with disulfide bond. That's a little bit like the covalent bond. So I think it's certainly possible, and it was very interesting because it was one time someone was surprised to hear to see what I show. I'll show you next, and we can actually grab the DNA and have a force up to like 1,200 piconewtons. And some people thought the covalent bond would have been broken by then. So obviously not, because we could keep going. Certainly 1,000 piconewtons, so nanometers is possible. And so then you want to study that bond breaking. Then you probably need to know a lot about the attachment, because once it's broken, and let's say you don't have anything else, so you have to make sure that the breaking the bond versus of the molecule versus the detachment. So I think maybe some people are trying that direction, and that's interesting. I think to see if we can pull apart the bond. Right. So these unfolding basically pull apart the hydrogen bond. Other systems. This is the last lecture. Can we get someone who has never spoken in the lecture to say something? The last chance, right? We demanded. Everybody, I think someone. There are people who have never spoken. Is that right? The person sitting next to him, poke at him, or can we get them? Well, this is the suggestions, so there's no right or wrong answer. Whatever you say is right, I suppose. Right?
Well, I know people have for packaging of DNA into phage viruses.
Yes.
I know people have actually measured the force at which the virus reels in DNA, but I was wondering if you can go beyond that and actually measure the work over some of these paths and see if that gives you a better understanding of the molecular motor that's reeling in the DNA.
Yeah, I think actually I didn't have the slide for that. I think they actually have some estimate of the energy required to put it in. Right, so from force, very often, if you just use the approximation, like force times distance is the word. So if it's near equilibrium, that's good enough for an approximation. So people have tried that. It's quite amazing how much they can improve it. Yes. So from this side, I don't know. Can we get someone to say something? Hey, one of you need to save the species. No, this is the game theory, right? If someone's going to talk, then I don't have to. If no one's going to talk, what do? Do we all stuck here forever? Everybody's staring at you. Are you gonna do it and save the rest? Is that worth it? Come on, let's get something. Or you can hope the person who is sitting next to you for him or her to say something. Figure out the who, right? How about this?
How about protein complexes? How about protein complexes?
Protein complexes, so protein and DNA complexes, and protein and RNA.
Protein, whatever.
Protein. Actually, people are doing that. There's like, for example, some protein actually was mechanically activated. So the pulling is perfect. You pull it, and then you see the activation, and you see the interaction. And then protein, DNA, protein, RNA complexes, yes, actually we're interested in doing that. We're trying to look at the genome inside H1N1. So influenza A virus, the swine flu, right? So maybe we could do the following experiment. We save the next pandemic to prevent that from happening. So anyway, so one can look at this. One would like to see the structure, the packaging or assembly of the virus. So these basically the virus that infect humans is different from those that infect bacteria. So very often it's a single-stranded RNA virus, and then they're coated with proteins, and then they form some structure, and then they package, so they assemble with some proteins outside, and then assemble. So if one knows how to, say, disrupt the assembly, then you can design the drug or vaccine to basically combat that. Of course, it's very complicated. Basically, whenever when people do work on vaccine, whenever you have something to disrupt the propagation, they mutate, right? So they change it. So the next one is drug resistant, and then you have to think about something else. So and then eventually, some people really trying to conserve region. It's conserved until you attack it, right? So it's always there. You feel like, okay, I just need to disrupt that, and then that will be a drug. But as long as you start attacking it, it's going to mutate. So one would like to see if we can find some universal rule that something you could disrupt. There's just no way, like, no matter how it mutates, that's the crucial things, and they will never be able to assemble. So that would be a good idea. Anything else? We finally got someone, but he has spoken before, right? Well,
did you want to show us the other 19
yes,
slides?
I
we have like I give you 19 minutes, so we have a minute.
Okay, that's okay. So these are the possible applications. DNA strand, DNA interactions, protein, DNA, protein. I won't go through all that. I'll just give you a couple examples. So DNA melting, why do people, this will start with the basic physics. What do you want to do? Start with the simpler systems, so we don't have to worry about all the complications. So DNA is simple and it's robust and it's fundamentally stable, and they behave. So, but in biological systems, it's also very important because basically you want to start a transcription. You have to open up the DNA for the enzyme to read the code, right? So the mechanical response is important because the DNA needs to be stretched. And there are other replication too. And then like in H1N1 virus, these are more medical type of applications. And then biomedical and microarray analysis, so DNAs are attached on the surface and then hybridized, and then people look at those signals and then try to interpret that as basic gene profiling, DNA profiling. And then so the one I will show you is a very basic, so it's actually single-stranded DNA. So it does not even have a complication from double-stranded DNA. The only thing it has is perhaps base stacking. And many of the single-stranded DNA is not even necessary like that. So just to have some basics with DNA. So the DNA has bases, and to form a double helix, they need to have a well-defined structure and a distance, and then the angles, right? The relative angles from base to base. So basically, what's called stacking. And sometimes the single-stranded DNAs don't have it. And in this particular case, it was discovered recently, at least studied in detail in 2007, and it was published in PRL. And it was considered one of the most interesting paper published in PRL in 2007 because they chose this. So what happened is usually if you just stretch a single-stranded DNA, a random sequence or some different like PolydA, this will basically behave like a Woolmack chain. It's a straight line. But with the PolydA, there were two plateaus. So it was a little bit puzzling because PolydA, it's like a polymer, right? There are no particular structures or sections or something that make like some sequence, and depending on the sequence, you could have form local bubbles and local structures. But PolydA is all the same. So what can contribute to this? So we want to study that, and then to see if we can answer these questions. So one proposal they have is perhaps during the first plateau is the phase transition, so unstacking of this DNA bases, because they when they are stretched and then they unstack, there is the energy is dropped. So with this single molecule manipulation, one can actually get this unstacking energy with these physical measurements without the external chemical interacting with that. So usually when people try to estimate this, they need to work on a double-stranded DNA, they melt it in addition to unstacking it. And then there's a way to do it is with a chemical, and then they have to sort of deconvolute that effect. It's somewhat complicated. But this is a straightforward way to get the thermodynamic product. So we did some experiment similar to that, and we used AFM to stretch it. Basically, the end-to-end distance is recorded. So what happens, we actually saw a different pathway. So the molecules are unstacked during this transition, and there is another transition. So very often when we stretch it, they go through this pathway. When we relax this molecule, it goes through this basically lower energy pathways. So what happened this way during this region? So we try many times. So sometimes we even see. So obviously this one's a higher pH pathway. So then sometimes the molecule will jump over to follow the lower free energy pathways. Not too often. And then if we do folding, refolding. So if we hold it and then wait it there and have it relax back, we see different basically some of these reasons. So one thing is if we hold it up to here and wait it there for a reasonable amount of time, basically long enough for it to reach equilibrium, usually it follows the low energy pathway back. But if we don't, and this before it reaches equilibrium, then it comes back with this different path. So that's somewhat expected. And then, so there are two things. So exactly what happened. So this is one thing. There was a previous question about. So can we see the covalent bond? So if we can stretch them this hard and they're still intact, so maybe it's possible. So at least this technique is capable of probing that. But we want to see what these curves represent, and we fit it with the Wong-Ai chain. We see they have a different persistence length. So this path is lower. It's a higher free energy pathway, but once it goes above, beyond certain, it keeps stretching and it will actually be lower. So what's happening there? So what we'd like to see is what kind of kinetics and what's happening in these regions. So one can see if there's, so basically there are two states, right? So when we have two states, we'll see if they jump. So we'll see if they jump from a high energy state to a low energy state. So it does. If we pull the molecule up to here and then fix it at a constant force, the molecule will basically, given time, it will jump to the low energy pathways, and then it will come back this way. So if we hold them at a constant force, we'll see these steps. So we hold them and then fix them at a constant force, and we'll see the molecule get longer and longer. But it does not always jump. It actually rarely jumps in one step to a higher, the longer length. It jumps in steps. So this is pretty. This was somewhat unexpected. So what happened here? So one possible explanation is there is another. Okay, I don't have the structure showing here yet because it's still somewhat speculation. So the first plateau, the molecule unstacked, and after that, so DNA has the sugar phosphate backbone. The sugar has this structure. It's not a planar ring, right? So it's so-called sugar pucker. So the ground state of sugar, usually people believe that if you keep stretching it, it will go to the let's say this one. So usually it goes to like about 7 angstrom, the phase, the interphase distance. So that's the ground state structure, and you pull it just gets longer and longer. But for PolydA and some of the RNA structure, the ground state of sugar pucker may be at a different state, which you can, when you pull it, the maximum of that is around 5.9 angstrom, so which should pretty much correspond with the end of the first plateau. So you can stretch it here. So beyond that, if you want to stretch it, then the 7 angstrom conformation is more stable, so they need to flip. So it's a little bit like the bowl chair. So it will flip. But if for some reason they get trapped, there's a kinetic trap here, it doesn't get flipped, and then you just keep pulling it, you can still do that. It just requires more energy. So so perhaps that what happened here is once the DNA, single-strand DNA is unstacked, they can flip. Basically, it's like a phase transitions. Anyway, there's a plateau, and then once all the bases are flipped, then you can stretch them. So here the force does not increase too much, but once it's goes to this contour length, then you need a lot of force, and then the distance does not, the length doesn't change too much after that. And then if you don't flip them, somehow they get trapped. Here, they don't flip, and they just keep pulling them, and you can still do that. But within this region, if you let it relax, it will flip, not necessarily one by one, but section by section, to go to the other state. So that's one thing the single molecule manipulation experiment can tell you, these details. Another thing is the double-stranded DNA melting. There's some debate. So it melts. There was a B form of DNA, and it melts. And there's as Boso says, Bustamante first had that, said it goes to the S state of DNA, and then melted to single-stranded DNA. And then so what happens during this stage is basically these days it's a pretty hot topic. People are trying to determine the conformation of this. This basically does not exist during regular DNA melting, like chemical. So only happens in the mechanical. So where there's a metastable state that exists, that's also of interest, or they just somehow melt into a single strand. So with the mechanical melting, we can fit with some one-line chain curve, and then they seem to describe this reasonably well. So these seem to be well-defined states. So we'll have a few minutes. So I think Chris probably showed some of this data here, as it showing the transition here. So with a little bit more time, I'll give you one example of RNA. So this is a beautiful experiment done by the Bustamante group. And they stretch single, RNA. The way they do it is that they have these candles attached to the beads, and then they move the beads to pull it. And then we've seen this before, so this is basically a hairpin, so it behaves a little bit more like a double-stranded DNA before it unfolds, and it goes over the barrier, and then becomes a single strand, and so this has a different characteristics. So the high force will favor the open state. So usually people just stop here, okay, you see these trends, but they one step further, they analyze the data and compare that to both measurements. So one thing is they can look at the fraction and folded state. So they look at these curves and you can see, right, how often there are the open state versus closed state at a given force, and then they plot this and fit with the equation, and then they can get the delta G. And so that's one method to get it, and then they also just use the area. So if the experiments are done near equilibrium, these forward and reverse trace seem to overlap. You can just integrate the area under the force to get work and the free energy. So it's on the order of 113. So it's basically orders of magnitude correct. They're not too different. And then they can use the kinetics. So they do constant force experiments. In this setup, and they also pull it, but they measure the extension and keep the force constant. It's still similar. Then we saw they have these phases, and they would jump between these two states. And then when the force, so these folded versus non-folded state, right? So at low force, they were mainly at the folded state. High force, they were all on folded state. So basically, high force would favor the non-folded state. And in between this is bistable, so the thing's jumping, right? So without enough resolution, they can see jumping. But eventually, they reduce that to some number to compare to bulk measurements, and they can look at the lifetime of one at one state versus another, and then you can get equilibrium constant K, and from there, then you extrapolate that to 0 force, and you get delta G, and then you get 156. So these three measurements will give you on the order of 150 kilojoules per mole.
Since RNA degrades, are these very hard experiments to do?
I don't think they're too easy. But I don't know, I didn't do this myself, but these are somewhat robust, but still pretty difficult. We're trying to do influenza RNA. That's a lot of things we need to worry about. Okay? But like if one needs to do some analysis, and first you pick an RNA that's not too complicated. But still RNA is difficult to work with. It's a lot harder than DNA. Well, last one experiment. So we have DNA on top of RNA. So this one nanostring. This is a protein. So to answer the question you was asking last time, so this is one of the proteins you can actually see some reverse coming back. So it's like a spring. So you stretch it and stretch the spring. Then you unfold each little individual domains like this when the people fly. And then it's almost behaved like a spring, so it's coming back, and sometimes you see some peaks. But I think I was saying it's difficult to see the details of the protein refolding because it folds one step. But that actually was suggestion yesterday was like if we, not necessarily this one, so that like we stop somewhere here, then if we have a long time, like hours, you could possibly see this refolding from here. Because most of this curved part is one line chain. So the protein folding, so-called folding going through transition state is actually, distance-wise, it's a very small distance. That happens at the highest force, but the distance is very small, it's basically resolvable. So most of the curve is actually coming from just stretching the molecule. So if you do that, then you may not see the details of the folding, but then this warm light chain is, that part is movable. This probably takes longer than people would have to wait. Yes. Any questions? Okay, so these are a few examples, and then that's it. Protein, DNA, RNA, and then next is the complexes and the samples. Basically, sky's the limit. People are working on more and more complex systems, and then even people including cells in the equation. Okay. So thank you.
Okay, after the extended discussion at the beginning of the talk, we have time for more extended discussion now at the end. Questions, please. Ready?
What is the smallest distance that you can measure between the tip and the stage?
Okay, so the absolute distance, so we're talking about AFM. AFM actually has a very good spatial resolution, much better than the optical tweezers. But the absolute distance usually is not that important. I think the thing to worry about is the resolution. So in the case of AFM, on the order of an angstrom, and the optical tweezers like nanometer.
I'm just wondering,
How close?
what is the smallest sort of molecule or system that you can look at?
Well, so basically the tip can actually touch the surface. It has to be actually will go into the surface. But for AFM, basically you don't want to look at the things that's too close to the surface because you have a surface effect. So it's not so much of how close you can get. You will get some results, but you can't interpret that. So usually we want to have the signal coming away from the surface, almost like a 50 nanometers away from the surface. And in the case of optical tweezers, they have handles, right? So so depending on how you define zero, I suppose it's where the handles are touching. But I think if it's very small distance, it's difficult to accurately define it because you have those long handles that are floppy too, right? And then for AFM, it's the surface effect. So usually we like to see the important features that are somewhat apart. That would be ideal. So so for very small molecules, that's not good. So we actually like to see long, big molecules, which will be an advantage of this because small molecules usually one can study with the chemical method because that's your favorite.
The experiment, how fast do you pour the molecule in comparison to the realization time of the molecule?
So for AFM, we can actually pour reasonably fast, but one thing is it's not so much of the molecule. The limit is actually for AFM in practice. The way the molecule is pulled, one actually moves the stage, basically through a cell, the whole cell. So if you move it too fast, actually will introduce the hydrodynamic effect because the whole fluid is actually moving. That's just the way the experiment is set up. That's the only way it works. So it will be limited to on the order of 5 microns per second. And for optical tweezers, they usually are moved in a much slower rate, like 1 or 2 orders of magnitude slower. I don't know if what the practical limit is. I think both the force and perhaps the stability maybe will trap. So it's almost like 1 or 2 orders of magnitude slower.
So since the pouring, since you pour the molecules very fast, so the process is not a quasi-static process.
Well, okay. So for proteins, that's pretty much the case. That's why one needs to use Jensen's equality. Basically, it's non-equilibrium. But for DNA, if we pull it at say even 200 nanometers per second, so like 0.2 microns per second, they're almost at equilibrium. So the RNA and the DNA work done with the optical tweezers, most of them actually were done very close to equilibrium. So perhaps the DNA relaxation time is shorter, and it does reach at least near equilibrium, at least as far as we can tell from the data. It does not have this wide spread of the value. So for DNA, RNA, very often people just interpret that curve as the equilibrium curve. Proteins is one needs to do some extrapolation.
So in this way, in the presentation you showed us the hysteresis loops. So the hysteresis loops will be independent of how fast you pour the molecule because it's almost a quasi-static process.
Right. For DNA, almost there's no hysteresis unless you have melting, then it's basically going to a different state. And then, well, with melting, then that's very serious destruction. Otherwise, if it's just mechanical, like a stretching, relax, usually don't see too much of hysteresis. And then, right, so for proteins, so this giant hysteresis, so it's not even, basically, very often the relaxation does not even show any reasonable curve. It just does not react in the time, even though basically didn't do anything, even you relax it slowly. So you waited, and once you relax it for a long time, you waited, and then it revolves. But almost it's way too fast for proteins.
Can you go slowly enough to maybe pull on a polymer that was in a glass state, like one end sticking up, and then test to see if there's instances in the polymer at all?
Well, one could probably do that, but the first test was on RNA, right? So they did that. So if you consider RNA the type of a polymer.
Well, I mean, was it actually in the glass state? Like you got a bunch of RNA that's all interlooped together and more or less solidified?
Okay, so no. To pull something from the glassy state, usually, well, we want to avoid that when we do single molecule, right? That's not what we want to do. Then you're talking about a different type of testing, like about that state, then I don't really know exactly how you test that because the equation was derived for a single molecule. So then someone needs to derive the genesis equality for a different system.
Well, I mean, in this case, the back would be the RNAs. You'd like have one RNA sticking up and pull on it, sort of like pulling one thread out of a sweater or something. And you wouldn't really expect yours to be pulled.
I don't know. I suppose if you have the equilibrium state, it started the equilibrium state, then depending on what you look, the genesis equality should hold. But depending on what you measure, you may not be able to measure the things that it can be tested. So I think ideally you want an isolated system, some simple clean systems without the complication of all the interaction without the molecule. So in terms of testing, so if you want to see what type of phenomena you can have with glassy system, that's something else. But if you want to test the genesis equality, you like to have a system that's well defined. And then in particular, in the single molecule experiment, with homozygous, it derived that equation specific for single molecule polar. Then that's what we like to do. And in that case, we want to work on isolated molecule, right? Because that will be a different interaction, and then.
Yeah, I was thinking it would be interesting because you're not starting with you're starting with glass.
Right. So
I don't know.
So if you start non-equilibrium, I don't think genesis is going to work. Then I think if you want to test it, if it's not going to work, I suppose you will get that result. Right?
Yeah, for the genesis equality of whole, you have to sample initially from equilibrium.
Right.
And the glassy state, by definition, hasn't reached equilibrium yet. You would not expect.
Right.
That doesn't meet the requirement.
Right, I think you were saying like the test to see, so that will not, genetically will not hold. But so the testing the negative result, usually we don't want to spend so much time and effort just to see, okay, so this one will work, right? So, but theoretically, I'm pretty sure that should be the case.
Yes, please.
Has anybody looked at pulling PolydA? Trying to get some information about them.
Putting what?
PolydA, so there's little hairs on the outside of bacteria. They're made up of lots of little subunits, and some of them are quite complicated, and people still don't know why exactly because they might have to form in a certain order and stuff. So it might be nice to get some information about.
Okay, so I don't know, like everything is done. So you're talking about pulling on the cell?
I don't know how it can be done. Maybe you can extract Then I will.
Okay, the tweezers can do that.
Yeah. Because you can hold the bacteria and then hold it to life if you have a tweezer. More of a microfiber.
The tweezers should be able to do that.
Yeah, but I think with the cell, it's a little too hard because the cell is going to deform. If you are talking about pulling with this cell, I think people are trying to do that, but cell is going to deform itself, so that noise.
Yeah, but you can back out the deformation and the curvature from an optical measurement. While you're watching the micropipette holding it, you can watch the cell deform and get an estimate of the energy of deformation.
Okay, so you want to know the cell, the deformation of the cell, not the molecule.
Well, no, and then you can subtract off the cell deformation from the extension curve.
Well, in principle, in practice, this giant thing is so soft and floppy. The noise from there is going to be much larger than the signal we're getting from the. It's hard, but I think it's doable in the future. I think that the people are actually moving in that direction. So that's why I say people are trying to add cells now. But it's technically quite challenging. But I think that's the direction for the next 10 years. That's what people need.
Do people have models they believe accurately for the elasticity of the cell in that kind of situation?
Well, so I know that some folks at Princeton have worked on deformation and cell curvature in
But at a single molecule level, would you trust subtracting off that energy? I'm just curious. I mean, I don't know how. I have no idea about.
I don't know. I haven't spent time on those papers, but I know that there's reasonably. I mean, people yell about curvature deformation in lipid and cholesterol mixtures, and I know that sort of curvature energy has been measured, but I don't know. So that's why I say it's possible.
I was just curious.
Yeah. Have you considered pulling on DNA strands while there's a DNA helicase, unzipping the strands to measure the forces?
I know people do fluorescence then. Helicase. I'm not on it, but I think I don't know. I would imagine whose money is trying to run it. I'm not sure. It's done a lot.
I know there's a group in Leiden that's looking at DNA repair mechanisms, and they were looking at DNA polymerase as it does the error correction mechanism and backsteps, and they've done stalling experiments and that sort of thing.
Right, there are a lot in transcription, but like specifically helicase, I don't know. I know there's a lot of study using the fluorescence on the helicase. Polling, I'm not sure. I would imagine someone has done it, but I don't know how it's tested.
Arthur said that with optical tweezers.
Okay.
Short and decisive answer.
Okay.
Okay, more questions? Well, if not, then let's thank Ching-Hwa for this.